Chapter 8. Jonas made an appointment to see the realtor, who handled the selling of the strip mall. He could have made arrangements online, however, when he called, a voice of an older woman answered the phone. "Hi, my name is Jonas, and I'd like to make an appointment to see a certain property your client has for sale." She didn't ask what property, and Jonas assumed that she had only one at the time. "Yes, Jonas, and how did you hear about the property?" "I spotted it as I drove by, and I just love the location. I'm new in town." "You know you could see everything online and—" Jonas didn't let her complete the statement. "I know, but seeing it in person is not like walking in each room, getting the feel and smell of the place." "You're very perceptive, Jonas. Business is done online now, and some of the younger realtors have no feel for that special touch. They don't want to meet their clients, they want the clients to do all the work, and then they come in and reap the rewards. I, however, will meet you at your own convenience and show you the property. What time would be great for you, Jonas?" "It's Jonas Blackstone. Give me an hour and I'll meet you there if that's okay with you." "That's fine. You're such a polite man. I'm sure you'll like what you see." The stores were located in a developed, busy area right off the beach. The place was small, but Jonas knew its potential, even though the area had only a few shops. He thought it was just enough space for him to handle alone. Maybe he'd hire a personal assistant to take care of the social media stuff. He'd never been an extrovert, otherwise he'd been a politician. Max had been his opposite. More sociable than him, even before going into the Marines. He'd have to hire someone to advertise for him if he wanted his business to fulfill its potential and make the money he'd need to thrive on his own. Jonas didn't like the time it took to post on a blog, getting a website up for his business, tweeting, Facebook, and all the media at his disposal that he had to be a part of to get the word out. If he didn't hire someone for that shit, he'd probably say something that would have the FBI at his door, and with all that had happened to him, he was lucky he hadn't been arrested by now. He'd been happy to keep a low profile and remain in the shadows. Jonas hadn't even thought about a name for the bar yet. What the fuck could he call it? All the good names were taken. As he drove to the location, he thought about what he could name it, and said the name out loud to hear how it sounded. "What about Crazy Cock?" "No. No. Then everyone will think it's a gay bar, and only a few will come. I want everyone straight and gay, old and young to drink and enjoy themselves," Jonas murmured as he drove into the parking space in front of the strip mall where there sat a late-model white Lexus. Yes, he'd been right. A bar in this location appeared perfect. Sitting and looking around, Jonas believed this place, with this location, would bring in the most money for him. Yes, bars usually did, where there were young men and women partying all times of the year. There was the matter of getting a liquor license, which he didn't think would be a problem. As a veteran, he could get certain types of vendor licenses, and because of that, he felt sure that no one would stop him from trying to make a living, even if he was a rich, but they didn't know that. However, the minute they heard the Blackstone name, they would put things together. Did Max have to plaster the Blackstone name on just about every building from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico? A man has to work, regardless if he has money. That's what Max had preached to Jonas after finding him on the street homeless, and placing him in the hospital to get him mental and physical care. Jonas smiled because he felt for once he'd done the right thing. The stores would bring in a nice income to pay for this investment. The extra income from the other shops, along with the bar, would give him a faster return on his money. A bar in that area near the beach was an ideal place, and a business he knew he could handle without putting out lots of money as he'd done in New York, where he'd sunk a fortune into the bondage club only to lose that fortune. He knew he'd fucked up half the money left him by his parents, and at the rate he was going, he'd be broke by 40. Therefore, he had to make this work, because he didn't want Max to say that he'd fucked up again. The disappointed look on Max's face had been more painful than losing the money. Jonas's thoughts had wandered like they often did, but now he focused on the place in front of him. If he purchased and refurbished the building, he could rent to high-end shops and a restaurant. At least those were his plans. With an upscale restaurant, he'd get people with money and willing to spend it. "This is perfect," Jonas heard himself say out loud. Looking to his right, there were condos everywhere, no shops, local restaurants or bars where young men and women could hang out, or the older crowd where they could take a walk and have a drink, and then leave the nightlife to the younger men and women. If he managed to swing this, get the right price, he'd have business day and night. If he installed the right fixtures in the bar, and made it conducive for the younger crowd, it would pay for itself overnight. Jonas smiled. For the first time, he would do something on his own and not need Max to contribute, or bail him out of another mess. Jonas had been determined not to fuck this up this time. He stepped out of his Corvette and entered the unlocked door. Looking around, Dottie came into view as she met him coming through the door. She smiled at him and extended her hand. "Mr. Blackstone. Are you the Mr. Blackstone?" Dottie asked with a wide smile. A middle-aged woman with blonde hair and blue eyes who had seen too much sun and more than enough life questioned. She wore a conservative cheap pink suit which did nothing for her figure, but she wore a beautiful smile, had lovely pulled skin which made her look 10 years younger than 50, which Jonas thought she was. "Not only are you good-looking and handsome, you're sexy too. You don't get that much package in one man these days in Miami. You may get that in gay men, but you're straight as they come, aren't you?" Dottie's face lit up thinking about the possibilities, and had she been 20 years younger? "Does it matter?" "Of course not, Mr. Blackstone." "But for your ears only, I'm straight," Jonas whispered. Her smile beamed as she held onto Jonas's hand and walked around showing him the place. Jonas chuckled, letting her have a moment. He looked at her, because he knew where she'd spent her money, on a plastic surgeon and a dentist. Jonas smiled at her and she returned the gesture. Then he recovered his hand, walked around touching, looking at the place, making a mental picture of where he wanted the bar installed. Turning to face Dottie, he admitted, "I'm Max's brother if you're speaking of Maximilian Blackstone." Dottie's smile widened as she cut Jonas off before he had a chance to complete his statement. "That's exactly who I'm talking about. Are you buying this for Maximilian Blackstone?" "No. It's for me." The realtor turned and faced Jonas and offered him a wider smile. "There's no problem either way. If your brother is in the market for a home or property in Miami, I hope you give him my card. And that goes for you too." Dottie reached into her purse hanging on her shoulder and flicked the card into Jonas's hand. When Jonas placed the card in his pocket, Dottie stood in his way and said, "The name Blackstone will get you anything you need in this town. Will it get me the woman I want?" That's the question that crossed Jonas's mind. "Just tell me if you want the place, or take your time and decide. Between you and me, I haven't had many queries about it lately. It's just sitting there. I know the owner would like for someone to take it off his hands. I think I can get you a good deal." Dottie offered. "It would be good for me if I can sell it, and I know by the look on your face you want this particular property." "You're right, I do want the property." "I assume you have a lawyer?" Dottie questioned, "to look over the papers once you decide." Jonas focused on what Dottie had said, and not the club. "Yes, of course I have a lawyer." He didn't have one, but he knew how to find one in a hurry. On the internet. But he didn't tell her that. He was in too much of a hurry to get back home, because tonight was the night he'd have a talk with Brooke, and hopefully they'd do much more than talk. After settling up with Dottie, Jonas drove home. Chapter 9. Pulling into the driveway, Jonas sat for a few minutes looking around. He'd placed his hand over his chin and chuckled. He liked this place, Miami. He could make his fortune and become respectable, he thought, especially since he believed everyone were as pleasant, laid back, and accommodating as Dottie. So far he hadn't been wrong. It wasn't like New York, where everywhere he'd turned, people were out to get something from him. Here in Miami, they were here to have fun and enjoy life. Jonas parked the Corvette in front of his rented house, hopped out, and rushed inside to pick up clothes and packages he hadn't bothered with. He'd bought clothes for his life in Miami, and the packages had been scattered around the large home, because he didn't think about placing them in the trash. What day would that be? He didn't know anything about living alone, and especially in a home. He'd always had someone he'd paid to take care of that. Now, with funds low because he'd fucked up lots of money on his bondage club in New York, he'd have to rely on what Max had placed into his account. Picking up his clothes, he realized that he'd made such a mess. He didn't have people cleaning and cooking for him, and he'd have to arrange that, especially since he'd need time to get the bar up and running. After clearing the house of clothes and throwing them into the closet, Jonas still had the seafood from last night in the fridge, but he didn't know how long sushi lasted, and he didn't want to take any chances, so he emptied it into the trash. "Pizza and a beer, that's good," he murmured, as he raced around the kitchen to place some of the unwashed plates and glasses into the dishwasher and get rid of the old coffee in the coffee maker. Then he hurried to the shower, took a quick one, and was out when the bell rang. Reaching for his robe, he shrugged his arms through and opened the door. The pizza was on time. But where was Brooke? When Jonas paid the pizza guy and brought it to the kitchen, and on his way to his bedroom, another ring. He sauntered to the door barefoot, still wearing his robe, and opened the door without checking, because he thought the delivery guy had forgotten to give him his free drink. Relief washed over him, and there stood this gorgeous beauty dressed in a pair of white slacks and white linen blouse and high-heeled sandals. Jonas couldn't believe his eyes. Her long flowing dark hair, flawless skin with plump lips covered with pink lipstick, had him mesmerized that he'd almost forgot how she looked last night. "You're beautiful," Jonas whispered as his eyes brightened and his cock stirred beneath the robe. "Can I come in?" "I don't want to stand out here," Brooke said, slanting her head to the side, wearing a closed smile. "Oh sure, of course," Jonas said, his hand trembling as he took hers. "I've never met anyone as pretty as you. I mean, I have, but I've never had a woman that I've liked in my presence as beautiful as you," Jonas confessed, nervous, walked beside Brooke, leading her into the living area. Brooke sauntered ahead of Jonas as his eyes captured her curvy body. She appeared taller because of her high heels, before she'd come to him on the beach barefoot. Brooke sat down as Jonas stood looking at her. Then he caught himself. "Would you like a beer?" "I'd prefer something stronger if you have it." Jonas fumbled around a cabinet where he thought the liquor might be. He'd stopped drinking since he'd come from New York and been sober for a year or more. He'd promised Max and Alex that he'd clean out, and so he did. There had been more to think about than himself. His child with Crystal and Max's children. Jonas wanted to be a good example, and yet Max had told him to leave. He'd only had one drink that night before he left for Florida, and he realized that he didn't have a taste for it anymore. But tonight he'd given himself permission to have a beer, since he didn't black out whenever he drank beers. Jonas found a bottle of vodka, probably from the last renters who'd leased the house. Jonas rented it furnished at the last minute on his long ride to Florida. He'd wired the money, and the house was his for however long he needed it. "Is vodka okay?" Jonas inquired, turning with the bottle in his hand. "That's my drink. I'll have a shot." Searching around, Jonas found shot glasses and poured Brooke one. "I'm only having beer." He handed Brooke the shot glass with vodka. Brooke tightened her chin up and drank it fast. When she downed that, she asked for another. Jonas didn't want to lecture her because he detested lectures, but he thought she was too pretty and too young for him not to say something, and he more than liked that young beautiful girl. "You should have something to eat first. I have a pizza and it's still hot." Jonas hurried to the counter island and opened the box to show her. Brooke agreed. Jonas had soft music playing in the background as she sat down at the bar. He wanted mood music, not dancing music, because he didn't want to dance. He wanted to make love to Brooke in a serious way. He'd wanted to get close to her, and now he had his chance. Picking up a piece of pizza, Brooke glanced over at Jonas. "What's a tall, handsome man doing alone?" "I'm not alone. I'm with you." She smiled and ate the pizza. "I don't mean that," she said, locking eyes with him. "You're so good-looking, I can't believe that you have no one." Jonas walked up behind Brooke, leaned and kissed her on her neck. His warm mouth inched up and finally made its way to her ear, where he whispered, "I'm hoping to make you mine, and soon. I have plans for you, Brooke, and as soon as I learn your last name, I'm going to ask you to marry me." "You know nothing about me." "When you tell me your surname, then I'll know everything I need to know about you, because soon everyone will call you Mrs. Blackstone. There's only one other woman that has that distinction, and she's married to my brother Max. See, you know I have a brother, and you still haven't told me about yourself." "It's Cartwright. Brooke Cartwright. Now let's not talk about me or you. I need to eat so I can get back to drinking. The world appears pleasant when I'm drunk." Jonas remembered when he thought like that. He'd lost his parents and joined the Marines. It was the drinking that appeared to make his life less stressful, and he was about Brooke's age then. After they ate and Brooke had too many shots, she started unbuttoning her clothing, and since Jonas hadn't had time to dress before Brooke arrived at his front door, it was perfect for him. "Will you take off my shoes?" she questioned, watching Jonas intently. Oh, she loves to have control over a man, he thought, peering at her. Jonas had misdiagnosed her initially. She wanted to control Jonas. He'd been with women who loved to punish men, and a good many deserved to be flogged. And he was among them. Jonas hadn't hung around looking long enough to see the entirety of what went on in that bedroom last night. That's why he hadn't come to the right conclusions about Brooke. But he was coming to the right conclusions now. He'd known women almost like Brooke, but they were much older than she. Someone must have taught her. Maybe a man, he thought, or she'd had been in too many immoral situations in her short life. He didn't want to guess which ones. They both had hard times, and now he wanted to change that. Jonas wanted to be with Brooke. Take her away from men who would use her, and give her a different life. He had started over many times, and now he wanted that for the girl he'd found himself falling in love with. It was Brooke who had all the control, and it was her who allowed her boyfriend to spank her. They probably played games that way, he thought. It wasn't the first time he'd seen this, but not with a woman as young as Brooke. It takes years to learn to control men and become a master at bondage and S&M, but from the little Jonas had seen, Brooke was a master. Jonas admitted to himself that he didn't want that anymore. He wanted a woman for his own, and if he would play games, it would just be the two of them. He wanted a relationship like the kind his brother Max and Alex had, and he wanted a family of his own, with that type of woman who wouldn't want to control him completely, where'd she'd chain him, order him around, and bring him to clubs to demonstrate how dominant she'd been in their relationship. Jonas had been determined to find out if Brooke was who he needed in his life, now that he was starting over again. When Brooke stripped off her clothes, stood in front of Jonas as he'd discarded the last of her shoes, and Jonas was still on his knees with his robe on when she moved her hips close to his face, reached for his thick dark curls, took a fist of his hair and pulled it up where his eyes were locked into hers. "You have wonderful blue eyes." "A bit sad. But I can make you happy, Jonas." Brooke didn't need to sell herself to him. Jonas had been blown away with her since the day he laid eyes on her. "Do you want me?" she whispered in a quiet voice, looking down on Jonas. Hell yeah, Jonas wanted her. His cock was throbbing, and pre-cum had rubbed against the fabric of his white robe. All he could do was nod, as she braced her hips to his face and pulled his hair forward as she opened her legs wide. With his mouth on her mound, his tongue on her clit, between her folds, and his face taking in her natural scent, where he smelled the strawberry body wash, he grabbed her ass cheeks with his large hands and brought her body close to his face, rubbing his face in her shaved mound. Jonas used his tongue to tease her trembling clit, and when Jonas's warm tongue touched it lightly, his mouth covered her folds, and he began sucking her clit hard. Breathlessly she moaned and punched her hips forward as she groaned in pleasure, and with each suck she tightened her fist around Jonas's curls. Half panting and breathing hard, Brooke said, "I told my boyfriend that it was off. I told him to go fuck off. I want to be with you, Jonas," she groaned out in pleasure. "Did you mean what you said?" Jonas leaned back panting, one fist on his hard length, stroking it from the base to the tip, looking up at Brooke. "Fuck yeah. I want to take care of you. I want you to be mine. All mine. I don't want you to belong to anyone but me. I'm yours now. And you're mine." And Jonas rested his face between Brooke's hard thighs, and she dry fucked his face as he sucked her clit. Then she let out a loud moan. "I want you to fuck me hard, Jonas. As hard as you can." Jonas leaned back and reached for her arm and pulled Brooke to the floor, and with his hard cock in his hand, he entered Brooke fast and hard. He'd forgotten about his condom. He forgot everything and everybody, except how wonderful her body felt underneath his, and how tight her pussy felt at that moment. "Oh God, this is good," Jonas groaned, wishing he'd never stop fucking Brooke. Wishing he could go on all night and all day. His hard body on top of her felt like heaven when he'd pushed his length in and pulled out of her warm wet flesh. He leaned over her, looking into her bright brown eyes filled with lust. He lowered his mouth over hers, and she offered him her tongue as it split through his lips. Jonas had been ready to come from the first time he saw her, and when he peered at her when he heard her scream. He had his hand on his cock fighting back an orgasm when he saw her naked and her boyfriend whipping her pretty ass. Now his orgasm rushed through his body down to his groin, through his cock's head, into Brooke's warm insides when his mouth crushed hers, and their tongues mingled and she bit his shoulder and screamed. His body tightened and his swollen cock's head expanded inside her warm tight body, releasing ropes of cum. Jonas nipped and kissed her neck, pinched her nipples hard as Brooke scratched, bit and sucked on the shoulder. "Take me from behind," she insisted. "My kind of woman," he thought. "Are you sure? I have to get a condom." "Of course I'm sure. I have some over there with my pants." Jonas reached for her pants, pulled the condom out of her pocket, placed the packet in his mouth, tore it, removing the condom, and sliding it over his still hard as a rock length. Jonas watched as Brooke got on all fours when he sat back on his knees adjusting the condom. He reached for her round hips and brought her to him. She craned her head to the side. "Slap my ass hard. I want to feel it, and then drive inside of me." "Without lubricant?" Jonas questioned. "There's enough on the condom." Don't worry, you won't hurt me. Once you have it all inside my ring, the pain will go away. That's when we will both enjoy each other, she assured Jonas. Jonas knew, but he'd never tell her how he knew about anal intercourse, at least until they became better acquainted with each other, and then they would have more time to express their sexual likes and dislikes. Jonas learned that those were important things which made sex more enjoyable. Jonas knew little about Brooke, but he knew that she enjoyed him eating her and she liked rough sex. He slapped her hard on her ass. Harder, Jonas. Jonas did it again, still not using all his strength. I need to feel it. Her ass cheeks were red on that last hit. He heard her breathing, he felt her taut nipples and they were stiff. Now put it in fast. Jonas reached for his length and drove it all into her, and she never winced or let out a cry. She groaned and pushed her butt into Jonas, causing his cock to go in deeper. Holding on to her hips, he pushed in, drove deep inside her fast and furious as his breathing became shallow and quick. He glanced down at her perfect full ass, his heart raced and he pounded deeper inside Brooke. When he looked down on her flawless skin, with his hard cock lodged inside her, he thought how beautiful, sexy and hot, and what an arousing sight with her on all fours with him behind her tunneling into her ass. Pull your dick out and take off the condom and fuck me. I want to feel you, Brooke commanded. Jonas could hardly catch his breath before she wanted something else, and he was willing to give her whatever she needed to satisfy her sexually. He stayed hard. Maybe it was the drugs the doctors prescribed, maybe it was Brooke being so sexy, or maybe it was just that for the first time he found someone that turned him on and he was sober. He didn't know what it was, and he didn't care. He thought this was it. He'd found a woman for him. Jonas wished he'd known Brooke before he'd gotten involved with the last woman he'd had sex with. She enjoyed being whipped before sex. He didn't mind that, but she wanted to be choked as he fucked her. If he'd known that about her, he'd never gotten involved with her. He enjoyed rough sex as much as the next man, but he had to tell her to go. He wished he hadn't, because it was then she'd been found dead in his club, and he'd been forced to get Alex involved. But he didn't want to think about that now, especially since he had this beautiful young woman who had just said she told her boyfriend that she wanted to be with him, and for him to go fuck himself. That had turned Jonas on more than Brooke telling him to fuck her in the ass. Brooke liked to be fucked in her ass, and Jonas was always up for the challenge. As long as that wasn't all she wanted. The secrets that may have existed between the two of them were slowly becoming no secrets at all. They appeared to like each other, and fell effortlessly into each other's sexual desires. Jonas placed one hand over her ass and another on her stomach to anchor her. His hand moved down to her pussy. He felt her clit quiver on his finger, and on the final push into her opening, he emptied his salty clear cum inside her tight ring of muscles. Brooke tightened her insides around his swollen cock, forcing more cum out of him. Then her body trembled and shook when she screamed, "I'm coming, Jonas, eat me." Jonas pulled out, flipped Brooke on her back, opened her legs, and he was face deep into her mound, licking and sucking as she wrapped her legs around his neck with his tongue deep inside her, bringing her to orgasm.